All right, guys, welcome back. Let's talk wheels, lift, and tires on my Hooptero. Now, I've got it flexed up here just so you can see how it kind of sits, how it tucks, and how it fits. And I went over the basic details in my overview video, but now I want to talk about all the details that make up this package. So like I mentioned before, these are 35s, and specifically, they're 315 75 16s, and I like these because they're functionally a 35 by 12 and a half, so they're nice and wide, they're pretty meaty, and they're on a small wheel. And I think this is the best kind of sidewall package that allows for a ton of flex. Right now I'm aired down to about 15 psi, and they really balloon out. So I really like these Toyo Mts. The truth is, I picked these because I got them for super cheap. Now, I would probably buy this tire again. I really like it for rock crawling. I've had no problem with grip on them. And so I like them, but the reality is I didn't go and find these. They more like found me. But I really like the tread block. It seems like it's really good at evacuating stuff, as well as these really form on the rocks well and get a lot of grip. The wheels that it's on, these are some steel wheels, very simple, that I've painted gold. They're a 16 by 7.5, and these are actually a 4-inch back spacing. However, I'm also running a 1-inch spacer on them, and the reason I'm doing that is because if you guys have followed me, you know I like my cars to be as wide as possible, not just for the aesthetics, although they do look better, but I want this thing to be as stable as possible as it's articulating. So I know that I can fit this. In fact, I could even fit a little wider here in the back. You can see there's about a 1/2 inch that I could go wider and still fully stuff in the back. And then because of the bump stops, I'm not going up that high in the front, and so I can fully stuff these as is. Now, spacers, some people love them, some people hate them. I would rather run a wheel without a spacer. However, this is what I got. I got the wheels for free, and the reason I knew that I liked this is because I ran some bead locks on this before, and they had a 3-inch back spacing, which basically means they just sit an inch further out than these do. But right now I've got them set up to be exactly the same. Now, the reason I ditched the bead locks, and everyone loves bead locks, they're so cool, and the idea is, you know, they're the best for off-roading. However, I could not get them to hold air to save my life. I disassembled them 6 times. I put RTV on them, I torqued them down properly. I did everything I could, and then I'd bump the ring off-roading, and they'd air down to 15 psi by default, which is fine when you're out here and you're exploring, but when you're trying to do like 500 miles back from Moab at 80 miles an hour, that sucks. So these tires are very well broken in because I've run them at highway speeds at like 25 psi or 20 psi. So I ditched the bead locks. I gave them back to my friend who lent them to me, but I knew I liked the wheel specs and size. So there's wheels and tires. And now let's talk about the lift. As I mentioned, I wanted to show you guys how it fits, and you can run this size tire, this offset of wheel, with a 2-inch body lift alone. You don't need to do anything else except for crank up the torsion bars just a little, but you can run it pretty much stock like this. You don't need a lift kit. You don't need any special arms. You can fit it with a 2-inch body lift. Now, I made my own 2-inch body lift just because I had the materials. You can see a puck there as well as a puck there. I can't remember the very long name of the plastic that I used, but it's pretty well used for this. And then I just got these extended bolts, and I just ran it through, lift the whole thing up and drop it down. In order to fit that 2-inch body lift, you do have to pull these brake lines out just a touch. You have to loosen up some emergency brake lines and other things in the rear to just let them droop a little more, as well as you have to move your transfer case lever up. So you have to get an extension for that, bring it up, and I had to cut a little bit out of the back of that so that it can fit and still clear. Some people have to do it, some people don't, but otherwise it's pretty easy. You can also relocate the radiator because it's gonna sit weird. I really like the 2-inch body lift because it allows you to clear the wheel and tire package. It allows it to flex and articulate. A lot of body lift looks pretty tacky. 2 inches of body lift fits perfect for this car. And as I mentioned, it allowed me to chop the frame and raise that bumper and the whole rear end up without doing a ton of weird modifications. I guess chopping your frame is pretty extreme, but I really liked that feature. And so that's how I started with this, but I knew I wanted to carry a little more weight. My springs in the back were really saggy. And so I did upgrade the springs to some Old Man Emu springs. Bought these secondhand from a guy who wanted to trade them out because they were too stiff. Old Man Emu, heavy duty springs, with some Bilstein. I think these are the 4600 shocks. Like I mentioned, these shocks, not my favorite. They're really hot right now. I've been coming downhill, and you can definitely tell that they're kind of heat soaked. I would rather run the adjustable shocks, and I have all of the hardware to run that when I get them. There's the, you can kind of see right there, there's the cap for it. It just goes right on here. I've got those coming in the mail so that I can run that and I can adjust it as I go. But like I said, you don't have to run this, but for me, this carries the extra weight. It carries, and these, they do handle pretty well off-road, but I left everything else stock back here. There's another shot of the body mount. And then up here, you can see I've got that frame chop that goes up. And so that gives me a little bit of lift in the rear in addition. I think I figured out between the tires, the lift, and the body lift. So I've got 2 inches of more tire diameter at least, 2 inches of suspension lift, and 2 inches of body lift. This is 6 inches higher than it is stock. So it's up there. And one of the things I did to help facilitate flex is I totally eliminated my sway bars. So I broke my sway bar like end links several times running the Gambler 500. They just would keep popping through here, and I just decided to get rid of them. And I don't regret it. I got rid of them front and rear. And so this thing sways a lot. And when you're on the highway, it gets pretty sendy. But for off-roading and articulating, it's the way to go. The thing just moves. All the tires can kind of go wherever they need to go. That's the way to go with it. So there's the breakdown on my wheels, lift, and tires. The last thing I'll mention is cutting. How do you fit this in here? I mentioned that I want to keep the fender flares. I think a 35 is as big as you can go. I know a 35 is as big as you can go if you want to keep the flares. There's one guy, AC Pajero, down in Flagstaff, I think he is, in Arizona, and he doesn't have flares, and he's running 37s, but he's also on a 3-inch body lift. It's huge. But for me, I want to keep the flares, and you can see I'm rubbing here just a little bit. I think that's mostly because my trailing arm bushing needs to be replaced. It just pulls forward just a little bit under certain circumstances, but it's just barely rubbing here, no rubbing there. And you saw on the other side, it perfectly tucks up here. Front's a little different. Front's always a little different. You can see here, man, that fitment to me is just about perfect. I need to be a little more aggressive right here. I tweaked the bumper, I ran it into something on this trail, and now it's catching. So I need to cut this a little more aggressively. But basically what I did is I just cut right here on the inside and took out this little part that pokes out, and I was able to clear it. So I was able to keep the front bumper relatively stock looking. I didn't take anything out of this upper part. Like I said, I'm not getting to the point where I'm hitting that, even at full stuff because of the bump stops, which, you know, maybe I'll cut, but you can see my CV angle. I don't want to get a whole lot more aggressive than that. I'm on the bump stop right now, and I don't want it to get too much more aggressive. So I could stand to go a little further up, but that's kind of where it's at right there. And then in the rear, you can see I got a little more aggressive with the cutting. Cut down here to this point. I cut the plastic back here, and I took a sledgehammer and just pounded this back. This is the inner liner, so it's just plastic, but I pounded a little bit of this back. It's honestly, compared to the Gen 3, especially compared to a lot of new 4Runners and Tacomas, not that much cutting to fit it. And what I did with this is I just found out where it was rubbing and cut. Then I go out and flex it on the trail, see where it's rubbing, and cut. And so that's all I've done. So what ends up happening is it looks stock. It doesn't look like it's been body lifted 2 inches, and yet it fits really well, it stuffs really well, it runs a really good tire package. So I don't think I'll go any bigger than this, especially with the gearing, which I'll get into in another video. The gearing turns these 35s really well, it stuffs really well, I barely rub. Like I said, I just hit that front bumper in the front, and so I think this is a really good package for what I do off-roading. So there you guys go. There's the breakdown on my wheels, lift, and tires on the Hooptero.